Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. We have to get on with this. We have a very short schedule here, so I'm going to start in right away. What is the scope of the problem that we're trying to deal with when we talk about appetite, anticipation, and drug addiction, and the experience of desire? I'd like to just take you through a short passage that I think really exemplifies the issues. This comes from a paper called Imaginary Relish and Exquisite Torture. Here you are, innocently reading a psychology journal, and an article suddenly mentions someone drinking an excellent cup of coffee at a sidewalk cafe on a sunny morning. You immediately imagine how good it would be to have a cup. You imagine the smell and the fresh ground coffee, the smell and taste of the coffee, and perhaps even the sound of the grinder and the bubble and steam of the espresso machine. It would really, if you would really enjoy a cup right now, the image has pleasurable piquancy, a tantalizing enchantment, like the tickle to your foot, which moves easily to a sense of torture if the desire cannot be fulfilled. From its inception, the thought captures your attention. It has strong emotive power, and there's a sense that it triggers action. What are the elements of this subjective experience? They include the intrusive and unexpected nature of the initial thought, the imagery of the coffee, the drinking of it, the pleasure and the torture that the image brings. Once begun, it's difficult to stop thinking about it, and it's in fact difficult to think about anything else. If the impact of the desire is particularly strong, its fulfillment may seem imperative. Okay. So this is an everyday example of what happens when you start to think about an issue and then you really, really want it. Some of you may leave now if you really want to get a coffee. If the coffee were sitting right next to you, you'd reach out for it, drink it, and probably all this imagery and thought would go away. But if it is not, then you may become restless, fidgety, go back to the book, start again, and so on, and then finally go and get one. To understand the neural basis of these phenomena and to come up with ways of helping people in trouble deal with them, we're trying to model these situations in laboratory animals. And I'm going to tell you some of the things that we're trying to do and some of the things that are beginning to lead to approaches to therapy and treatment. The main player that we have concentrated on in the last period of time is a system of the brain called the dopaminergic system, midbrain dopaminergic system, that projects to many different areas of the brain. The cerebral cortex, the striatum, in this here, the midbrain, and other regions that are involved in emotion and thought. This set of cells lies right here, and different cells project to different regions. But the cells, of course, are not unattached to anything, and many of the regions that I just mentioned project back to these cells. And these regions are involved with cognition, with emotion, and action. Well, when are these neurons normally activated? They're activated by the detection of novelty, by the detection of rewards, food, sexual partners, and so on, by the detection of pain, acute pain or stress, and detection of conditioned stimuli that are predictive of these events. What happens when these neurons are activated? First of all, attention becomes directed. We pay attention to those stimuli that activate. Behavior is energized. Locomotion, activation, animals move around a lot. The behavior, there's arousal and emotional responses and anticipation of something. The animal and the human will approach the stimuli that lead to these rewards, these natural rewards. So what is it that we're trying to find out about the drugs? The drugs activate these systems. Cocaine, amphetamine, nicotine, alcohol, heroin, morphine, all self-administered by us and by laboratory animals. All of these activate this dopaminergic system. Though the effects on dopamine and other systems of the brain, these drugs affect emotion, cognition, and memory. The drugs are considered rewarding in that people and laboratory animals learn to perform work to get them. This is just a slide showing you the human brain on cocaine, amphetamine, or alcohol. These are acute studies showing activation of the dopamine system in the striatum in human brain when these drugs are given to human beings. In laboratory animals, we can measure the levels of dopamine on this axis in the rat, different individual rats, as a result of taking, in this case, heroin, in this case, cocaine. The levels of dopamine start to rise when the animal starts taking the drugs. So these are the direct drug effects. The next point is that repeated administration of these drugs leads to what we call sensitization of the behavioral and neurochemical events. So these effects are long-lasting, and they take time to develop, and they contribute to the problem of relapse months and even years after drug taking is terminated. Let's look at a couple of the pieces of evidence. Here's one showing the effects of amphetamine in the rat, given in one group given here amphetamine, and we measure the activity. Next time we get amphetamine, you can see that the animal is very active. This group gets a saline injection, or just an injection of no drug at all. 2 weeks later, we take these same animals here, and we give them all amphetamine. For this group for the first time, this group for the 6th time. And you'll see that the behavioral effect is very exaggerated. What happens to the dopamine system? In this case, the group that's getting amphetamine for the first time shows a modest rise in dopamine level in the striatum. The group that's getting it for the 6th time shows an exaggerated rise. We call this sensitization of the effects of the drug itself. There are also long-term changes in the anatomy of the brain as a result of repeated administration of these drugs. Here I'm showing you a single dopamine neuron that has been filled to show up its shape and character. As a result of that, you can examine the dendritic arbor of this cell, the receiving end of the cell, where the impulses come in from other parts of the brain. Well, my student, Devin Mueller, did this repeatedly, and he measured the length of these dendrites in animals that had had amphetamine repeatedly versus animals that had saline. And you can see here the group results that he's getting a change in the receiving end of the neuron during, as a result of having had exposure to the amphetamine. Well, what does this make the animal do? How does it change its behavior in some way? Here's a study showing that animals who've been exposed to amphetamine in the past will now work harder when given a chance to self-administer it. Here you have the number of amphetamine infusions that these animals take, and here you have the number of responses required to get the next infusion. So originally, first lever press, 1 infusion. Then he has to make 3, then he has to make 10, then he has to make 20, and so on. And the animals that have had saline in the past were willing to work about 10 responses per infusion. The animals that have had previous exposure to the drug are willing to work about 50 responses per infusion. Finally, I want to emphasize what I started with are those environmental cues that trigger our thoughts, trigger our behaviors. And these are stimuli that have in the past been associated with drug taking. You can recognize them all, I'm sure. So through learned association with the drugs, these stimuli and the contexts that are paired with drugs start to control responses, first of all, to the drug. The drug effect is different if these stimuli are around. These stimuli also become attractive in themselves, and they instigate drug-related thoughts and promote rumination and drug-seeking behaviors. So craving and desire and pursuit of drugs become context-dependent. And I'd like to give you a couple of examples of this. First of all, here's an experiment in which, previous to this test, the rats were given amphetamine in one environment and saline in another one. Another group, this we call the paired group. They got this test environment was paired with the drug. In another group, this test environment was always paired with no drug, but they got drug somewhere else. So they had equal exposure to the drug. The blue group have no drug experience. Now they're tested with an injection of amphetamine, okay? And they show different responses to the same injection of amphetamine, depending on where they had the drug before. If we look at their dopamine response, we see that only those animals that get amphetamine in the paired environment show this exaggerated response to the drug. But we can also test the animals searching for the drug, or the control that the stimuli that have been paired with drugs have on the behavior. And to do this, we train the animals in this way. We inject the drug and put the animal in one environment for 20 minutes. The next day, we inject the animal and put him in with saline and put him in the other environment for 20 minutes. We do that repeatedly so that they get 4 injections of the drug. Then we test the animal by putting him in the middle and seeing what he will do. Where will he go? Here's the behavior of the animals before they had any experience. They move around in the 3 compartments equally. They go. You can see the traces at the beginning of the time are blue, and then by red is at the end of the time. Here's what they do after the pairing. They spend most of their time in the drug-paired environment, and though they go out occasionally, they run back into it and stay there for most of the time of the test. If we take these same animals and test them repeatedly over weeks without giving them any more drugs, we see that they continue to show the preference for this place where they had the drug before. This is something that does not go away easily. These animals were tested every 2 weeks. This group was tested every 6 weeks. And you can see that the effect of their behavior is very strong. This shows the dopamine response in human beings who are cocaine addicts, now drug-free, to a film showing drug-related stimuli, showing people taking cocaine and so on. This is the same area of the brain that I showed you before that was lit up when the drugs were actually given. And I'm going to end on this story because I think I've learned more from this paper, which was written in 1979. It's the story of a treatment program for heroin addicts. And in that program, they brought the people into a relaxed hospital-like setting, and they stayed there for a period of about 2 months. Then they started to test their responses and their, in quotes, desires for drug during periods when either the place, there was no drug available. They would not be able to have drug or take drug. Then the 2-week period when they were able to self-administer heroin in a controlled way, but they were able to self-administer it when they wanted. Then they had methadone, which is a treatment that people have been given to reduce craving for drugs. And then another 10 days drug-free. And then they were given an antagonist to block the effect of the drug. The thing to note is that craving scores are quite low when you know it's not available. When you know you can't smoke, like in here, right this minute. Okay? Now that I've mentioned it, you may start to crave. As soon as they knew that the next day they were going to be able to take drug, you can see how craving was increased. And this dotted line shows you the amount of craving in the first 30 minutes after they'd taken the drug. So the drug, it doesn't stop craving. It seems to induce it, and you want more. Then when they were on methadone, you get a slight decrease when it's known that methadone may block the withdrawal symptoms, but it does not necessarily block craving, and so on. That's, I think, this quotation from Meyer and Mirren. There was an elevation of craving associated with the availability of heroin. The knowledge that heroin would be available resulted in an increase in the level of craving compared to when they were drug-free. I'd like to mention some of the people over the years who've been involved in this work with me. This is not a complete list, but these are the people that have contributed most to the work with drugs. And to mention that the center, as we were told, became an FRSQ group in 2007. And if you have any more interest in us, please go to our website. Thank you very much.